All right, everybody. I am thrilled to be joined again by Representative Sean Casten. He represents Illinois' 6th Congressional District. He is a scientist trained in molecular, I'm trying to remember this, molecular biology. No, yes, and biochemical engineering. He was a CEO of a company that found a way to turn heat into energy to both lower the cost of energy and help fight climate change. He's gone to Congress, and he is this, a very unusual kind of congressman who actually gets stuff done on a bipartisan basis, and that doesn't stop him from fighting the MAGA nonsense that's causing so much trouble in our democracy. Congressman, great to be back with you.
Edwin, great to be with you as well.
So we have meat and vegetables to talk about. The meat is this fight against authoritarianism, but the vegetables are the good things that you do to in the same time to get stuff done. And you just did it again. And to introduce this, I should remind people who are listening from Illinois that Senator Durbin, who's now in his last year after a long career, when he was a younger man and in Congress, he led the fight to get smoking off of airplanes and made it safer for every single one of us who flies. And this week, Sean Casten just made it safer for everyone who's going to fly. And I'd love you to talk about what you got through Congress and why it's important.
Well, number one, it's extremely flattering to be compared to Senator Durbin. May I have half the career that he's had. We're gonna miss him in our delegation.
Yep.
So the piece that we got through, and this has been 2 years in the making. It seems so blindingly obvious, but it's not. And for the record, I got concerned about this before I ever heard who Nathan Fiedler was, which is that if you are in a job and you would like to have some mental health counseling, you should go get the mental health counseling you need. For most jobs, that's, as long as you have health insurance, that's true. Your mileage may vary, your health plan may vary, but you get the point. In the aviation industry, under FAA rules as they sit today, because we passed this in the House, we still have to get it through the Senate, but as they sit today, if you go to your boss and say, I need some mental health counseling, you are immediately grounded, and you do not get to meet with an aviation medical examiner for 6 months if they have one available. And you may be grounded for longer than that until you get cleared to fly again. And you can understand, I suppose, in some sense, why the FAA does that. Obviously, somebody who's going through some mental health challenges that might put health and safety at risk. You want to make sure that everything is protected in the first instance. But what happens practically is that pilots, air traffic controllers, students of pilots look at those rules and say, well, I better not ask for help then. And we became aware of this when we got a phone call from a family in Chicago whose son was in pilot school, needed mental health treatment, and his parents found all this out after he'd taken his own life, and learned that that essentially he had made a conscious decision not to get that help because he knew that then he would be grounded and wouldn't be able to finish pilot school. And as we started digging in and peeling that onion, you hear these stories. I'd go speak to pilot mental health conferences, and on the way in, a pilot would come up to me and say, one of my colleagues just took his life yesterday because of this issue. And if you start thinking about why people need help, maybe you have a significant, long duration mental health issue that creates, a problem for the safety of the passengers on board. And goodness knows, you want to look for that. But maybe you're just going through a really difficult life situation. Maybe someone close to you has died. Maybe you're going through a divorce. Maybe, you've had some financial stresses in your life. Maybe you were a pilot of a plane where the door blew off midair and you managed to get the thing landed and everybody was safe, but you hit the runway and said, holy smokes, I could just use someone to talk to right now to get my adrenaline level down a little bit. All those people are not asking for help. And so what we did, and we got it done with Pete Stauber from Minnesota on a bipartisan basis, got it unanimously through the Transportation Committee and then unanimously passed on the floor, is the Mental Health and Aviation Act that says, number one, you will not be penalized for asking for help. If you ask for help, we will provide resources to the FAA to increase the number of aviation medical examiners so that they can get you checked out right away. No change in health and safety, but take the stigma away from this, and then also make sure that we publicize that these changes are going to go through in the program. There's more pieces we need to do. There still are a bunch of issues with medication and reimbursement rates. The job's not done, but it's just we want our skies to be safe. We want our pilots to be healthy. This shouldn't be controversial, but we have to change FAA rules to do it. And so that's what we did on the floor last week.
It is remarkable to get anything done in this Congress. Anything done. It doesn't matter that it is that it should be obvious, because a lot of things it should be obvious that some of your colleagues can't see. So I think it's really great. And what you haven't said, but I'm sure it is true, it takes an enormous amount of time and work and personal conversations with your colleagues to build the coalition that lets something like this go through without somebody saying, I can grandstand on this. I can say, no, real men are tough, and that's who we want to be. It takes it's a lot to make that.
Well, and in fairness, I think the process has been refreshing that mental health has been significantly destigmatized. Pete Stauber, my Republican co-sponsor, represents Duluth, Minnesota, used to be a cop.
Yep.
He's been very open about the challenges he went through working in law enforcement, of needing, goodness knows, a job that's going to create some stresses, and needing mental health counseling. And, is able to talk about that in a personal way that I think, you need to do to normalize this stuff. And I should also mention, I don't want to be overly critical of the FAA. We started this process 3 years ago. The FAA did finally change their rules, but they didn't have the resources to add AMEs. They didn't have the resources to market this program. And the nature of their rule change had a lot of mays where you'd like the word to be shall. And so we needed to do this to get that done, but it has been a long process. And I suppose the last thing I'd say about this, you may want to talk about it more, but just for your own listeners, I am not a pilot. I am not on the committee of jurisdiction. This is not an issue that I have any personal familiarity with the way the Congressman Stauber does. This all came because someone called our office and said, I've got a problem. Can you fix it? And so, as you think about, whatever you're going on in this moment, we do listen. When people say, if there's an issue, call your member of Congress, your senator. You have more power than you appreciate, as long as you're not asking for crazy stuff.
Yeah, well, I think it's a great story, and I think we need to hear about stuff that works. We do. So let's change the subject, I'm afraid, and talk about some other things, because immigration is a huge district. Your district is home to lots of immigrants. I think I read, I'm probably close to right, if not exactly right, that English, that a language other than English is spoken in about a quarter of the households in your district. I guess, we have ICE raids going on in Illinois, and Secretary Noem showed up for a video shoot like she does. And an immigrant was killed by ICE not far from your district this last week. What do you make of all of this here?
It is, I have to do my best in all these to try to not use the foul language that would express my honest opinion of Kristi Noem and some of the other folks who are doing this. Number one, I want to remind anybody listening, and I realize we're on, your audience probably leans a little bit left, but when I went out and I did a town hall in Dixon, I led off by saying that I wanted to quote one of my favorite immigration scholars, who said that I've always seen America as a great shining city on the hill, and if that city must have walls, make sure it has doors and windows so that all with the passion and the drive who one can come.
I know who that scholar is.
And
said it in Dixon.
And that the day America stops welcoming immigrants to our shores is the day America abandons its position of leadership in the world.
Yeah.
That scholar, of course, is son of Dixon, Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
And the idea that America should be a country where the best and brightest want to come, the idea that we should be proud of the fact in Illinois that we have these fantastic national labs named after people with Italian names doing research named after German researchers who all came here after World War II, and how much of what makes America great is because we're the place where those people want to come. And that's even before getting into all the wonderful things that happen when you represent a district where there are people speaking all these different languages, which means you've got great access to Mexican culture and Polish culture and Czech culture and Palestinian culture and all the things that exist in the larger, Chicagoland region. I would vastly prefer to be that country than a country that people don't want to come to. And yet we are in a moment where we have a White House that is staffed with, this is a scientific term, extremely mediocre people. And the biggest threat that a mediocre person has is you might put them in the deep end of the pool with people who swim better than they do. And so this push that you've seen, whether it's against DEI and hiring initiatives that would put more talented people in the pool than you are, this push against market competition that says let's shut down offshore wind facilities in Rhode Island because that facility will provide cheap power to the grid that could undercompete energy sold by some of my more mediocre colleagues, is all part and parcel with the clampdown on folks who are in this country. And look, there's this narrative that, like, if you're an illegal immigrant, you broke the law and you shouldn't be allowed to be here. Understand who those people are. These are people who may have come here totally legally on a student visa, fallen in love with someone, started a family, and then the relationship didn't work out. And so they are now here with a completely legal child in an uncertain legal status. They may be someone who came here because they, some folks my family's personally been involved in, some people who came over after the war in Afghanistan, who helped our troops, came here to get away because the incoming government in Afghanistan was not supportive of people who'd helped the American troops. These people worked with our military as translators, came here under temporary protective status, but do not have full status yet. They may be the farm workers who, prior to the Bracero program, traveled north and south to follow the crops, and it was no different whether they were traveling from Texas to Wyoming than whether they were traveling from Mexico to Texas. They were just following the harvest. That used to be a completely legal activity, and now that's deemed as no longer legal, but we still need our crops harvested, and those are still the people who know how to do it. Those are the oh, and let's not forget the dreamers, right? The people who came over here at a young age, who we told them, if you disclose your circumstance, you don't commit any felonies, you are a good citizen, we will give you a path to citizenship, which means those people's names are now in databases that they provided to the United States government because they took us at our word.
And don't forget all those workers in that plant, those Korean workers who are here because we asked them to come and set up a plant in our country.
Exactly. And this is not to say that there are not some bad people who come across our borders, but of the 14 million undocumented folks in the United States, the overwhelming majority fit into one of those buckets of visa overstays, farm workers, dreamers. That's the majority of who that is. So when we decide as a government that we are going to go back on the word that we gave to people who came over here under temporary protective status, people who came here as dreamers, and that we are going to kick people out just because I don't know, their skin's a little browner than ours, they speak a different language. All that we do is hurt America, right? Why is the American economy slowing down? Well, it's in part because we're kicking out the people who actually do jobs and buy things and have houses and grow the economy. And by the way, one last thing on this, I don't know, I could go on for hours. If you actually look at crime statistics, not the anecdote that we might pull out, because as one of my colleagues is fond of saying, the plural of anecdote is not data. If you look at the data, a undocumented immigrant to the United States statistically commits crime at a lower rate than a documented immigrant to the United States. A documented immigrant to the United States commits crime at a lower rate than a native-born American. That is entirely unsurprising. because
It's
if
also
you
entirely not the narrative we're getting from our federal government right now.
no, exactly. And so like I'm all for fighting crime, but let's send the cops to the neighborhoods where crime is likely to happen.
Mhm.
And so a part of what, when we send troops to the mall in Washington, D.C., when we send troops, to Broadview as happened today, you're sending them to low propensity crime areas, which means you're taking them away from areas where the crime could be happening.
Well, so let's just let things go wrong, and things went wrong, and a Mexican citizen, I guess, was killed here, not far from your district last week, by ICE. The ICE guys said, "Oh yeah, we stopped the car. He panicked and ran. He hit one of our officers. He dragged the officer. Oh my gosh, sorry. He dragged the officer behind the car, and the officer shot him and killed him." I'm imagining being dragged behind a car and having the wherewithal to pull out my gun, aim it, and kill a guy. I doubt their story, but leaving that aside, who's going to hold them accountable? And I just don't even know. I mean, asking you, not rhetorically, but really, I just don't understand in the federal government. Is this supposed to be, does the inspector general for HHS look at, excessive use of force by ICE agents in the same way that a civilian oversight panel does of use of force cases in a city like Chicago?
I mean, look, not to be pejorative, but the president of the United States is a 34 times convicted felon.
Yeah, right.
It is
not going to happen.
He has surrounded himself with people whose qualifications to their job is not that they are good at their job, but that they won't stand up to him.
Yep.
And that that's a real problem. Congress should be doing oversight. Congress should be holding them accountable. We are doing everything we can as the Democratic minority to do that. But ultimately, on the committees I serve on and all the committees in Congress, it takes a majority of the members to vote to subpoena someone.
Yep.
And as long as the Republicans are more concerned about what happens if they stand up to Trump than what happens if they don't stand up for our democracy, we're in a pickle. I take some modest, soft encouragement from some of the criticism you saw in the Senate of RFK, from the fact that we actually have some Republicans who think pedophilia is bad and we should release the Epstein files. I don't take that to conclude that we're getting bipartisan support in the issues. I take that to conclude that the collapsing support for Donald Trump nationally is causing some of my Republican colleagues to think, I don't know how much longer I want to hitch my wagon to this train.
Yeah, I thought, prolonged popularity in the 30s would do it, but it hasn't done it yet. But we'll see.
No, I'm not sure. I mean, if you look at the average of all the polls, I'm not sure he's in the 30s yet. He's getting close.
Yeah.
But I think also the areas where Trump has historically been strong, he's deeply underwater now. He's under the water on the economy. He's underwater on immigration.
Yeah.
And so these issues where I think he has certain animal instincts. I would never say he's not a smart person, but his intelligence is very
animal instincts and Epstein in the same paragraph.
Yes, but I think he instinctively understands that people don't like him. Mm-hmm. And he's very good at changing the narrative. And so I mean, this is a horrible thing to say, but in certain ways, I think Donald Trump is really happy about the Charlie Kirk situation because it caused people to talk about something other than Jeffrey Epstein. That's horrible, but I want to back up to your ICE issue.
Yep.
Why Republicans are doing this, why Trump is doing this, we can pop psychologize all day. The consequences of what's happening, and I think about this in the situation with the story of the shooting last week.
Yeah.
If Americans, whether documented or otherwise, walk down the street and they see somebody who is a member of a federal law enforcement branch, who is armed and has the jurisdiction to use deadly force, and they question whether or not that person is committed to carrying out the law equally and applying it to all people equally, the rule of law kind of goes out the window, right? And I'm not justifying or condoning acts of violence against law enforcement. I'm not for a second suggesting that. But if you think that law enforcement isn't your friend, what would you do?
Well, we have examples
You
of it.
didn't have to attack, but are you going to go to that person and say, hey, there's crime going on down the street. I want to let you know about it.
No.
Or are you going to keep your head down?
Well, we have a lot of policing is not new in America, and there are communities, and Chicago's got plenty of them, where police over their the history of policing of Chicago have been very abusive in some neighborhoods. And we've spent years trying to overcome that by rebuilding trust. It's one of the reasons why there's civilian oversight of use of force incidents now to help rebuild trust. And it does work to rebuild trust.
It's also part of the reason why, a lot of folks you talk to in law enforcement do not want to be asked to enforce immigration policy,
Right.
because these are folks who know that in order to do their job, you need to come to me and notify me when something's going on.
Yep.
Not worry about whether I'm going to first ask whether I can arrest you for some other cause. That's the essence of community policing, right?
Yep.
I represent a lot of, I represent Mount Greenwood and Beverly. I represent a lot of police officers.
You sure do. Yep.
And sure, I mean, there's bad apples in any discipline, but the overwhelming majority of these people are good people who want to walk down the street and be recognized by the people on the street. Hey, officer, how are you? What's going on today? Thank you for being here. There's a good relationship. And when you have that kind of relationship, then you're notified and the community gets safer, right? If you don't, if people in the community view the police officer as someone who they're not sure if it's friend or foe, it gets really bad in a hurry. And we've seen, since Trump has come into office, we have seen a huge drop in reporting of domestic violence. That is not because domestic violence is going down, but because if you are a person who's in an abusive relationship and you want to get safe, it's one thing to say, I need this person to be, I need to be safe from this person. I need housing where I can feel safe. I need resources where I can feel safe, but I still need that person to pick up their end of the rent. That's another question when you say the process of doing this may get that person deported where I now can't raise my kids.
Yeah, that's really
so think about the consequences that go. Put yourself in that circle.
And they're all bad.
Right.
All right. We have a little bit of time left. I want to change the subject because you're a man of science. And I guess you can answer this question by talking about America's imperiled healthcare with RFK, or what's going on at the EPA. But what is this administration doing to, as you said earlier, the plural of anecdote isn't data. What are they doing with scientific data? What are they doing with science in this government? Is it just being replaced by ideology?
Largely, yes. And I mean, look, measles kills kids. Why are we not making sure that kids don't get measles?
Right.
I wasn't fond of Trump in his first term, but I'll give him a tremendous amount of credit for Operation Warp Speed, for mRNA vaccines that made a huge difference. I mean, the fact that we got that under control as quick as we did was because of that science. And now we're shutting down mRNA research. There's nothing good that comes of that. And this is not a defense of the administration, but I would just point out that knowledge and truth has always been a political endeavor. If you control information, you have power. If somebody else controls information, you are ceding your power.
Sure. I mean, ask Galileo. It's not a new problem.
Exactly. Or more recently, I'm always, I love the James Baldwin quote that he said back in the 50s, that the purpose of education is to teach people how to think for themselves. What is up, what is down, what is black, what is white, is there a God in heaven or not? No society advances unless they have that type of person around, and no society really wants that type of person around. and so there has always been that tension. And how do we have and I don't mean to sound overly Boy Scouty about this, but we holding a country as diverse as the United States is together requires that we all believe certain things are true and don't question whether those things are true. It is helpful, if not entirely accurate, to believe that we were founded by people seeking religious liberty who had a nice meal with the natives and then they all got along, right? The truth
and
is,
we can acknowledge that wasn't
here.
true, but it's aspirationally true.
Yeah, I mean, the truth is messier, but we aspire to it. It's helpful to believe we were founded by people who believed that all men, maybe even all women, were created equal and are entitled to life, liberty, and happiness. We didn't always live up to it, but it holds us together to believe that. And so there is a threat to our union if we question how much of that is true. I would argue there's a greater threat to our union if we insist that you can't question.
Absolutely. And that is happening on campuses all the time. And may he rest in peace, and definitely should not have been murdered. Charlie Kirk put out a watch list of professors that makes it very hard to ask those questions. We have maybe 4 minutes left, so I got one last topic for you, because we are in a tough time in Congress to try and fund the government. Are Democrats going to hold the line and refuse to fund the government that MAGA wants?
So, I mean, I just got off the floor. The CR did just pass out of the House. I believe one Democrat voted for the CR and 2 Republicans voted against it. So it is a overwhelmingly partisan CR, and that now goes to the Senate.
Yeah.
For comparison, when we had the continuing resolution in March, I think it was 100% Republican support. The question will really now come to the Senate of where does the Senate go? And I'm not in the Senate. I have some colleagues over there, but we'll see how you handicap it. I think the struggle that makes this time harder than past times is that Congress has the power of the purse. That's pretty clear from the Constitution. Congress has an affirmative obligation. If the executive branch is not executing the legislation that was passed by the legislative branch, I'm using those words intentionally, that is why they are called the executive and the legislative branch. If the executive branch is not carrying out those laws effectively, we have an affirmative obligation to do oversight and hold them to account. The White House is wildly disobeying congressionally mandated funding, just choosing not to fund things. The Republican leadership in the House and Senate is refusing to do any oversight. And that makes the government funding conversation much harder because trust is the currency of the realm. And if we were to pass a continuing resolution that gave, I'm not saying that this is my policy position, but let's say we passed one that gave every American free education and free healthcare and free housing and every lefty thing. Why do we think they would carry that out?
Well, we think they would.
Something that extreme is not to be trusted. Well, what is the thing that would be the currency of trust? And you could imagine a White House that was concerned about that and was bending over to provide some accountability. You could imagine a Republican leadership that was concerned about that and doing some oversight. You can only get by so far in imagination.
Yeah, and I think Republicans are arguing it's time for a clean CR. The last one that got passed wasn't clean. It included a provision that lets these emergency declarations go on forever. If they want a clean CR, we should
just understand. If this CR passes, the Obamacare tax subsidies go away.
Yeah,
lots of people lose their health insurance. That's a choice, right?
Terrible.
Also, keep in mind that you'd mentioned the emergencies. This Congress, under Speaker Johnson, has voted to change the definition of a day.
Yeah,
because under the Emergency Powers Act, if the president declares an emergency, Congress can overrule that within 30 days. So we filed a motion to say there is no emergency, shut down the tariff, shut down all of these definitions of emergencies. And Mike Johnson changed the House rules to say that a day is no longer the amount of time it takes for the Earth to rotate around the sun.
Right, that happened in the last CR. Yeah.
What happens? Yeah, subsequent to it. So as a practical perspective, like I said, Johnson, if he wanted to, and Thune, who by the way has to get Democratic support because they need 60 votes in the Senate.
Yep.
They could say, you know what, we may disagree on policy, but let us all agree that as members of Congress, we are going to defend the constitutional prerogatives of the institution that employs us. That would be a noble thing to do. And if they did it, I think there's probably a way through this. If they're not willing to do that, then we're going to be left saying, would you vote for something that makes every American sicker and provides no accountability?
I think that's got to be our last word because it's a great word. Yeah. Thank you. I know you have to run. You have a hard out. So
thank you, Edwin.
Thanks. I always appreciate talking to you.
Yeah, likewise. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Oh, it's an old trick. The president in trouble at home goes abroad to check.